Please move to the middle of the seats so that people that are coming later can join us. And ladies and gentlemen, it's the session about Unified Ethereum L2 ecosystem competition. Let's talk about the frenemies and how we reduce the fragmented between L2s. And together, we have Ben, Hart, Jesse, Steven, and Vitalik Buterin. Let's give them a big hands.
All right, we working? Okay. Hey guys, I'm Hart Lambur. I'm the founder of Across Protocol. I'm going to do a little unconventional introduction to this panel here. So we'll set the stage for what we're talking about. Okay, so 4 years ago, Ethereum had a scaling problem. You guys probably remember we had 15 transactions per second. At peak times, the cost of doing a Uniswap swap was like $50. It's extremely expensive. It was slow and kind of unusable. And one of the guys on stage here helped align our Ethereum community on this rollup-centric roadmap of what this would look like. This was back in October of 2020. And it turns out this has actually worked. It's worked pretty well. Hold on. Hold on. So let's look at what happened here, right? So October 2020, rollup roadmap comes out, led by this guy, Mr. Vitalik Buterin. But then we keep going, right? Then we have the first optimistic rollup permissioned at the time, but Optimism, a few months later, comes out. One of the co-founders is on stage here, Mr. Ben Jones, right?
Yeah, Ben.
A few months after that, Arbitrum comes out with a permissionless version, right? Here we are with Steven. Woo. Thank you, Steven. Okay, Jesse from Base doesn't get a slide on here. Sorry, Jesse. But
I helped with 4844. You know, we played a little role.
So we get March of this year, Blobs ship 4844, and if you guys remember, Blobs now made like the L2s cheap, like really cheap, fractions of a penny to do basic things. And so like look at that chart. That chart is up and to the right. We have scaled Ethereum. Scaled it by many orders of magnitude.
That was when we clap.
Give these guys a round of applause, right? There we go. We scaled Ethereum. Like, well done, guys. Should have timed that better. Okay. Now, like, once you solve any good hard problem, and like, let's go back. Like, Ethereum had some negativity on the timeline. It's turned around a little bit recently, but this was the big, hairy problem Ethereum faced for 4 years. And we really did solve it as a community with many people on stage here, many others in the audience. It's pretty cool. But of course, you solve one problem and get another one. So what's our new problem? We've now fragmented Ethereum. So what we're going to talk about on stage is how we unify Ethereum. And that's my unconventional intro. And now I want to go in and ask our panelists here just to give us an experience where you've used Ethereum and had just a bad UX with its many L2s. Doesn't have to be long, but let's just talk about, let's admit to the problem. Ben, you want to start?
Adding a new chain to interact with on my wallet.
Yep.
Yeah, same. Whether it's going from an L2 to an L3 or L1 to a different L2, adding the chain, then going and trying to figure out how to bridge to that chain, like, can be quite complicated and definitely have given me pain in the past.
I'm a user of on-chain social with Farcaster, and Farcaster's core identity contracts live on mainnet, but a lot of the transaction activity happens on Base, and that's where I hold most of my assets. I had to renew my Farcaster account, which you have to do every year, and I didn't have any gas on Optimism, and so thus began the long process of moving gas from Base to Optimism, figuring out how to execute the contract there, and then making sure I could actually continue transacting. Very frustrating.
A while back, I lost $100 by screwing up the process of depositing to Polymarket and sending coins to the wrong chain.
I thought we'd get a Polymarket example, but yeah. All right, so we can admit, even with the leaders in the space, the UX of navigating these L2s is pretty difficult. What about also from the developer experience? Like, I'd love to get just quick takes on, many developers in the audience. part of the problem now is developers don't even know where they should build. Do they build on Base? Do they build on Arbitrum? Do they build on Optimism? Do they build on ZK Sync? Do they build on Scroll, Linea, da-da-da-da? So just like quick takes. We're not going to go through everybody all the time, but just quick takes on how do you think this, how are developers supposed to pick where they build, and what are your thoughts on that? Vitalik.
Developer experience. Yeah, I think, I mean, the challenge is like we have all of these nice standardized Web3 APIs for doing like things where those things are confined to the same chain, right? And you know, you can do sends, you can do calls, like everything is nice and standardized. You're calling one JavaScript function, but then as soon as your application requires people to do things on multiple chains, like you have to go and figure out your own custom thing. And I think that's like both a big pain for developers, and we have to remember that you know, developers are a very, very long tail, and I think especially as adoption becomes more mainstream, is going to inevitably include people who are less and less skilled and like further and further from the discourse that is like actually like talking about all of the core principles and like why all of the adjustments to them are happening, right? And it's also bad for security, right? Because from a user's perspective, like every single thing that the developer of each application has to do is a thing that the user has to trust them for.
Yeah, and I'd say it's not even just programming and kind of like doing function calls. One of the other big challenges that we see is there's a large array of assets that are now spread across different chains, whether those are NFTs or ERC20s, and they're siloed to those local environments. And so when builders want to kind of tap into that liquidity, or they want to build experiences on top of that, you know, culture that's been issued in NFTs, they actually aren't able to. And they're kind of stuck again, building a little bit of a silo, or having to figure out these like wild things that are custom to break out of that. And I think that's holding back innovation in the space.
Yeah, I think also that we see like specialization in different chains. You know, Arbitrum strengths are DeFi and gaming, but if you want to build in, you know, other verticals, you might choose to go to Base. And like definitely developers are choosing, you know, we're seeing clusterization of different types of applications, but I think also from like a user perspective, part of the problem is there's this like deep fascination and awareness of the underlying infrastructure. Like when I go and order an Uber on my phone, I don't think about, I wonder if Uber is on AWS or GCP. I just think it's an Uber. And I think part of us is actually, you know, ironic for me to say, is us moving a little more into the background and giving users their experience and not like giving them the hyper awareness of all the developer tools.
Yeah. Ben.
I guess we'll go down the line. I mean, to some extent, I think the nature of this question is an example of where we need to be improving, where like, in principle, everyone up here is doing EVM like equivalent code for a reason, and that's so that developers can just go and deploy on all the places. And the reality is that if you're a developer, there's a huge overhead to deploy on multiple chains versus on one, and you have to like manage deployments and addresses and chain IDs and all these things. In reality, we should be at the point where developers can just write applications, and it feels more like a user choosing to install an application on some chain than it does even that the developer has chosen to deploy it there. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's echoing a lot of what folks said, but we just have to make fade into the background. As Steven said, the developers should write applications, not apps on a specific state space.
Yeah, you and Steven, sounds like you really agree there. Fade in the background. Love that. Okay, so Vitalik, there's this trade-off in scaling Ethereum, right? We've achieved more scalability. You can argue there's a trade-off in scaling Ethereum. We've achieved more scalability with all these L2s and L3s, which has kind of led to more fragmentation, more chains to navigate. I'm kind of curious just to get your takes, and for the audience, of how worried you are about interoperability. Like, from your seat, does this scare you? And maybe going a little deeper, like, how worried are you about getting the different L2s to actually cooperate? Because they don't necessarily have aligned incentives here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's definitely one of our top problems right now. Like, I think if you think about the delta between the status quo Ethereum experience and, let's say, like the credit card experience, right? Credit card experience has a lot of interoperability, right? You can take a credit card from any bank, pay it on any one of those, like insert, tap, whatever terminals, and like it figures out everything in the back end. And like it is for some reason, right? And you do have to like wait for that spinning wheel to like confirm, and often for some reason that I haven't quite understood, it takes as long as an entire Ethereum slot. You know, it does have like the interoperability piece solved, and it feels like you're part of one ecosystem. And I think if Ethereum is not like cannot meet that level of experience, then it is going to lose to things that do. In terms of how I feel about our ability to solve it, I mean, I feel like I've actually been impressed by the level of willingness to commit to solving this problem that I've seen from all kinds of layer 2 teams, all kinds of wallet teams, all kinds of like users, ecosystem actors. It feels like there's a big willingness to actually get the problem solved. And I mean, obviously, I think the real test, right, is when you go from words to action, right? And basically, when you say, you know, are we actually going to see wallets incorporate chain-specific addresses and incorporate, you know, a bridging protocol to like automatically do transfers? Are we going to actually see, you know, like L2s follow the standards that all appear for on-chain configs, and then including, you know, like state verification and like message verification stuff that comes after, right? So I think the ultimate test is definitely, you know, like when things hit mainnet. But out of everything that I've been actually able to observe so far, I've been like actually impressed by people's willingness to put serious work into it.
We like that. So maybe I'll ask a similar question in a slightly spicy way to the rest of you guys, which, if we're being real, like the three of you are competing for users, you're competing for TVL, you're competing for mindshare. At least there's a perspective that argues that, and you're competing for developers. And so how do you all think about your own incentive structures here, about interoperability, and about why like being unified with your competitors is a good thing for you or not? Stephen.
Sure. I don't think fragmentation is good for users, and I don't want any user to be on Arbitrum because it's difficult or painful for them to be there or to get off and they feel stuck. I want users to be able to go seamlessly anywhere in the Ethereum ecosystem, and the reason that they might choose Arbitrum or another chain is because they want to be there. They like the developer features, they like the ecosystem, and that's really, you know, where they want to be. So my basic thought on how we should think about interoperability is we should try to get to not a unified Arbitrum ecosystem, not a unified, you know, super chain ecosystem. I think we should try to get to a unified Ethereum. And that should be the vision we set. And so much today is like undefined, and we don't know how to implement some of our interop visions, and a lot we do. But what that vision is, I think, is going to be very, very formative into what we build. And the vision that I have is to how do we unite not just two Arbitrum chains, but how do we unite Ethereum? Now, the caveat to that is there are certain technical reasons sometimes where a particular stack, you can unite the chains much more closely. And I'm a big believer in, like, you know, if there is a technical reason, a technical benefit we can have, if there is a reason why two Arbitrum chains or two OP stack chains can talk together more efficiently, we should definitely exploit that. But to the extent that there's no technical limitation, we shouldn't like draw arbitrary lines and say, okay, we're going to build a structure of Arbitrum chains or a structure of OP chains. Unless there's a technical reason, all those chains should talk together, and I think that's how we get a unified Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that. I even think the good news here is like, you know, I think maybe there was like a vibesy, visiony answer to that question that, you know, has been persistent in the community of just like, oh, it's going to be positive sum. We've all got to grow the pie. This is the future that we're all building towards. If you go Ethereum. I think the good news is like, it is not the case that we have to rely on those vibes to get us there. I think like, Vitalik, you brought up the example of interoperability with credit cards. Like, that wasn't because there was some regulation or like vision for credit cards that we had to like socially preserve. It was because a credit card where you can pay anywhere is better than a credit card where you can only pay in one country or one state. So I think the good news here is that it is in our incentive to do this. And as a matter of fact, the L2s have already done this. It would be a lot easier to build a rollup that you could not bridge back to Ethereum. And nobody's out here saying, oh, why are people, the L2s are not going to allow you to bridge back to Ethereum. It's a perverse incentive. No, the answer is because nobody would come and use the products if they were stuck there permanently and there wasn't a way to get back to the rest of the ecosystem. So luckily, I think it's like, you know, there's a vision vibesy answer to this, but there's also just the best products are going to win, and the best products are the one that don't lock people in.
I do wish we didn't have 7-day bridges, though. That would be nice. But that's a different thing. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm a +1 to both of those. I think Base sits in a like somewhat unique position in that we are not a roll-up ecosystem. We're part of the superchain, but we also are really excited about making Ethereum great again and like connecting us up to everyone, including Arbitrum and every other layer too. And I think that kind of idea of being a bridge, not an island, and connecting up to the broader Ethereum ecosystem means that when we're thinking about interoperability, we're thinking really about like how do we pursue many paths that let us get that ideal user experience and ideal developer experience. And I do think there are going to be value of more tightly clustered chains. You're going to be able to get more interoperability. You're going to be able to get higher capital efficiency because people are going to be willing to opt in to slightly higher trust considerations. And that has to be a subset of a broader set of interoperability, where if you're an Ethereum L2, you can have, maybe with a slightly lower capital efficiency, the exact same capital execution. And that's what we're working on with RIP 7755, which works across all L2s. That's what we're working on in a more kind of trusted way with Superchain interop. I think those things are going to come together to get us to this world where it just works for users. And like Ben said, like, that's the thing that's going to drive us there. If we want to get 100 million people, 1 billion people on chain in the next couple years, we can't have broken experiences. We actually have to have experiences that are 10x better than the Web 2 experiences that all of us are used to. Because if it's good enough for crypto, like that's not good enough anymore. We just need to be better.
Yeah, it's a good segue. Good enough for crypto from 4 years ago. That's
not enough.
That's not enough. That's not how we get the next billion people on. And it's a good segue. So let's start talking about like solutions here, or like your guys' ideas for solutions. And I build an interop protocol. I have lots of my own ideas. But if you had a magic wand and you could wave it, what are your like top 1 or 2 things you'd like to see solved, near term, medium term, around interoperability? Like start with Vitalik. What's your magic wand say?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that's like upstream or of everything else is on-chain configs, right? So layer 2 configs being like objects that are registered on chain, and that would cover chain IDs. That would also cover like you would have functions in that contract that would do things like verifying state proofs and verifying like receipt and transaction and event proofs. It would potentially include all of the information that you would need for a wallet to be able to interact with the chain, right? So right now, I think that's basically like chain ID and a couple of other basic things, right? But I think that set of information is going to expand a lot. And then once you have that, then that makes it much easier to do like a version of like say ERC 7683 that just works with every chain automatically. It makes it easier to do a like make chain specific addresses work. It makes it easier to have a universal light client of all L2s, which I think is another one of those important visions that we have to move toward, right? We've believed in light clients for a long time, but if most activity is on layer 2s, then we're not done unless the light clients support layer 2 as well. So I think, definitely like on-chain configs are one step, and then after that, just easy ways for users to move assets between chains as we've been talking about. And I think in parallel, it's like a totally different work stream, but continuing to work on the light client stuff.
Yeah, and I think the on-chain configs are maybe the enabler of the thing that I'm most focused on, which is the wallet layer. I think when users are coming into wallets today, they're presented with a ton of different networks, a ton of different assets, and then these 0x addresses that basically mean nothing. And if we just continue to layer on complexity, where it's like, okay, now you don't only need to deal with a 64-character 0x address, you also have to have like a chain identifier next to it and understand what that means and understand the security properties of that. I think that's not going to work for everyday people. And so I think a lot of what I'm focused on and the team is focused on is figuring out how do we take this underlying infrastructure, like putting chain configs on chain, and then actually bubble that up through the wallet to be able to build better experiences. So we replace the 0x addresses with names, but those names are now chain aware. So if you send to someone's name, it just works. It's going to go where they want it to. And if you have balances across different Ethereum networks, you can just combine them all and send at one time. But I think by building in this infrastructure to a wallet experience that becomes totally seamless to the user, this complexity is going to actually fade away. And we're not going to be having conversations about like internet tiers today on stage. I think a few years from now, we won't be having conversations about Ethereum tiers. It will just work. And most people will not know whether they're on layer 2. They won't know whether they're on base. They will just get secure applications that are fast, that are cheap, that are easy to use. I think for developers, there will still be a lot of knowledge there, but for everyday people, I think it's going to fade into the background.
Yeah, I think if it had a magic wand, the things that people want are fast, synchronous, interop, and I think some of the technical ways to actually implement that magic wand are definitely the things we discussed. But ultimately, there are different levels. So to talk about the layers of the stack for 1 second, there are different layers of the stack that contribute different pieces, but ultimately if they're not packaged together, it's like, I think part of the problem of interop today is there's so many different solution paths. So like we just shipped a feature called fast withdrawals that for Arbitrum any trust chains takes down the withdrawal period from the 7 days to 15 minutes. And that's fantastic, but that's not an end user, so that will plug into a solution like across, but ultimately that also would be great if it bubbled up back into the wallet. So I think that we as an ecosystem are doing a great job like shipping exactly this is what we need. Interop features on so many different layers, but how to package it up to the user that they're not aware of these layers, that all these layers are just working seamlessly for them is going to be the trick that I think the magic wand would be helpful for.
Ben, you got anything to add? Or are you bidding me?
I mean, I'll do a quick one.
Do a quick one.
The bar in my brain is just in hell right now. It's so bad. So my answer would just be chain-specific addresses so that it is no longer possible to send funds to an address and the recipient go, oh snap, that's on the wrong chain, that money is gone. That's it.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize for you guys. So it's like, okay, the bar is so low that there's very simple things we can do to raise the bar, which like, look, maybe that's a little depressing, but hey, it means that in a year's time we should be able to make some wins here. So chain-specific addresses so I don't black hole my money. Great. Vitalik has L2 configs, which is sort of this building blocks that we can permissionlessly add new chains, understand the security properties of chains, deploy things without there being a middleman or a blocker. Jesse talking about the wallet level, which I think there's a lot to go into there. If I'm going to give you my vision of what this should look like, it's I click one button in my unified Ethereum experience, and it does the action I want to do on that other chain quickly and cheaply. And
yeah, plus one on that, and I think this may be where I have a slightly different perspective at times than Vitalik or maybe Ben. Like, I almost feel like the chain-specific address showing that to users is like taking us off the path that we need to get to. I think it's a really important piece of infrastructure. Like being able to configure chain-specific addresses is a good piece of infrastructure for developers, but I think what we need to be pushing to is a world where we're not showing users addresses. Like we need to be showing them names, and we need to be showing them simple user experiences or buttons that they can click where they can confirm, are you doing the right thing, without having to understand, oh, here's this really long string, here's this thing. Like I think that pushes us further down this line of complexity, which again can be a really, really valuable developer tool, but for the end user experience, like I don't think we want people manually sending to Polymarket anymore. We want a button that's like, deposit $50 to Polymarket, and if you connected your wallet, it just works. And I think that's where we got to push to.
We'll go off script here for a second, because this is a point that I'm actually curious to get Vitalik's take on, because I think there's a difference of opinion in like pure chain abstraction. I don't care at all what chain I'm on, but Vitalik, I think at some points you're like, well, we do want to know what security assumptions the user's taking. And I don't know, just for a 30-second detour, V, like, what's your updated thinking on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so for the, like I definitely agree that there's like huge sets of settings in which we should not be showing addresses at all. Like for me, the polymarket flow is like, it's worst case as it is today. The improved thing is if they replace the copy paste address thing with a chain specific address, and then at least it's like a little easier. But then the really improved thing is if like you have a button, you press it, and then you have a, like we extend the Web3 like RPC API, and we have a cross-chain payments request, and then your wallet just satisfies it in whatever way it can. And then we can also get that adopted for consumer merchant settings, and we also have a QR code version, and so Dymo and like all of these brilliant phone wallets will be able to just send and receive immediately across chain to arbitrary chains. So that part is important. On the security side, I think, I mean, like I do think that wallets should somehow make either make users aware of like which chain that they're moving funds to when they're depositing. I think wallets should probably have opinionated choices about where they store, like what chain or chains they use as like a user's home, like where they store the majority of a user's assets. And I mean, that could easily mean like also showing warnings when you send to some chain that doesn't follow security standards. So I think we do need to like keep doing those things, but at the same time, like the process of just like sending from one L2 to another L2, it should still like feel like sending.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think there's a middle ground there that I think everyone agrees with. So if we want this vision of clicking buttons, which I agree with Jesse on too, it can be domain specific. Like on my Polymarket app, I trust Polymarket, polymarket.com, click a button, I understand what I'm doing there. And then, you know, when it gets other domains, maybe we're a little bit more security aware. Got a lot to talk about there, and we'll talk more about what we can do with intents and unifying one-click experiences between chains too. But I wanted to spend a second just to go into the kind of ecosystem-specific interop techniques some of you all are building here. And let's keep this quick because I want to be aware of time. But like Ben, tell us a little bit about Superchain native interop and the vision for that. And specifically, love to like get the thoughts on how does that help unify Ethereum and or just make Superchain better. Give me your vision.
Absolutely. So Superchain interop is all about building a secure message passing protocol that doesn't introduce a fundamentally new set of trusted actors to support bridging within the superchain. So basically what you do is you leverage the fact that these chains are on a shared standard with shared governance and the fact that they already have fault proofs, and you build a way to pass messages quickly between them using the fault proofs that already secure the bridge in the first place. So that's the TLDR, 30-second view. In terms of what that enables, honestly, what we need to do is pair that as a backend with the broader Ethereum interop on the front end. So like that improves capital efficiency and the ability to write applications that span multiple chains within the superchain. And that's really valuable. It defragments the superchain, and it's a stepping stone towards defragmenting Ethereum. And the way to do the balance is you come at it from both directions. From the Ethereum perspective, we have to unify standards that work across all chains. And then as the ecosystems on the back end improve, we just lower the fees, improve the capital efficiency.
Yeah, you're shilling my talk. Like right after this, y'all, I'm doing a talk on 7683, which is sort of like the standard on the front end. And I'm going to talk exactly about how on the back end we can plug into different settlement systems, which is then a great segue to go by Stephen, where you already talked about fast withdrawals briefly, but Arbitrum's doing like the fast withdrawal stuff I love from a Cross's perspective. I actually put a tweet thread out about why. I need to put a tweet thread out about why I love it so much, but we'll talk about that separately. Fast withdrawals and then chain clusters. Like, give me kind of like what's the within Arbitrum, what are you guys doing to make interop really beautiful there?
Yeah, so the first thing is shipping like whatever features we can that will plug into other layers to make their jobs easier. So fast withdrawals, which I mentioned before, takes down specifically for any trust chains, takes down the withdrawal time from 7 days to 15 minutes. And then, again, that's not a feature that's the user facing in and of itself, but that's going to make something like a cross much more efficient and ultimately much more able to add more chains and therefore lead to interop. But the other thing, which we haven't discussed yet, is chain clusters. So chain clusters is actually, kind of super chain-esque, like in terms of the technology, but I think the vision that we have, and is slightly different. Correct me if I'm wrong as I sort of try to paraphrase the difference, but it's a really nice piece of technology. So chain clusters or a super chain, it allows different chains to cluster together closely in a way that they can get really good interop and like synchronous experiences, and it's actually fantastic. The problem is well, you might call it a benefit, I might call it a problem. The fact is that in order to do this, you have to like kind of trust the other chains in a particular way, and therefore you have some shared governance structure. If I'm going to join a chain cluster with another chain, I have to trust that something wacky. If they're doing something wacky in that chain, but we have synchronous interop that's faster than settlement time, right? There's contagion, and something bad there can like get to my chain. That's where you lead to the trade-off, I would call, of a chain cluster or a super chain construct, is that you have to all trust each other and therefore really approve to each other's governance. So what I believe, and I think this is where we diverge, is one for all doesn't really work because I think it stifles innovation. If 1,000 different chains from 100 different verticals, DeFi, NFTs, gaming, etc., are all in one chain, they aren't going to want to innovate in the same way. So we have a chain building with us called Phoenix, which is adding FHE, privacy, built into the chain using fully homomorphic encryption. Like, your DeFi chain is not going to say, hey, sure, I'll take that wacky new technology and I'm going to interop with that. They'll be like rightly saying, not in my cluster, like not in my super chain, and that's why I think that ultimately having one for all is great for interop, but stifles innovation because it leads more chains to do the vanilla thing, because it's frankly going to be hard, and for a good reason, to get governance approval to do something that's kind of wacky and kind of different. But the wacky ideas of today could be like the most promising feature of tomorrow. So our vision of chain clusters, which is again a very similar technology, is more self-selecting chain clusters. The best example for this are two chains run by the same team. They just want to cluster to get a better user experience. They trivially trust each other. They're trivially governed by the same thing. A different example is vertical-like structures. So you have all the DeFi chains in one cluster, all the NFTs in one cluster, and you have these clustered islands. Within the cluster, they'll innovate in the way they'll be aligned, and they'll innovate in the way and they'll govern themselves in a way that's unique to their needs. The NFT changes might be different than DeFi. They'll cluster themselves. Yes, there will be users that want to jump from DeFi cluster to NFT cluster, and that's why we have to build great interop for these islands. But we think a system of self-selecting clusters so we can have both great interop and also great innovation.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, this is the part where I love Ethereum ecosystem innovation. It's like, okay, you guys actually have superchain and clean clusters, similar ideas expressed in different ways. And like this idea of like, yeah, many chain clusters doing some bizarro and random things and innovating on the fringe is super cool. All right, Jesse, you mentioned 7755 a second ago. Yeah, two folks on the base team, Wilson Cusack and Jack Chuma, and many others, have put together this other standard called RIP 7755, which I look at it kind of as like super innovative nested storage proof type concept. You got a bit of different perspective because, like you said, you're not an L2 ecosystem, but Coinbase and Base are pushing this. Why? Like, what's your vision? What's the thought process?
Yeah, so we're a part of the superchain, and we've also been pushing forward interop there, and we're really excited about the capital efficiency that can get between all of the superchain chains. But I think a little bit to Steven's point as well, when we're thinking about Ethereum, we want to make sure that the customers, people who are actually coming to Base, they can transact everywhere. Even if it's a little bit more expensive to transact everywhere, like, that's okay. The experience has to be seamless. And so what we're doing with RIP 7755 is we're basically defining a Ethereum-wide standard that can make it trustless to do cross-chain execution and can plug into things like 7683 to make it so that it's really, really seamless. And so one way of thinking about it is that 7683 kind of defines this top-level intent structure, where it defines what does it look like to define and execute a cross-chain transaction. But in order to actually settle that transaction, i.e. move the funds around that can make it happen, so when it gets filled, the person who filled it gets paid back, you need some way of proving that that transaction actually happened. And inside of the superchain, we can use superchain interop. And that's great, it plugs in. 7683 on top of superchain interop means we're gonna get incredibly capital efficient execution across superchain chains. But the second you go outside of the superchain, you also need some way of proving that. And that needs to not just work inside of the superchain, it needs to work across Arbitrum. It needs to work across all of Arbitrum's chain clusters. It needs to work across other L2s that have different configuration. And eventually, heck, it might even need to work across other L1s where that's actually possible. And so that's what 7755 does, is it basically makes it possible for you to do a trustless proof that an execution happened on another chain, and that is designed in such a way that every L2 in the entire Ethereum ecosystem can plug into it. And so you put that underneath 7683, and you combine it with these local chain clusters, including the superchain, and you get either best-in-class, incredibly capital-efficient execution inside of these clusters, or slightly lower capital efficiency, but still really seamless execution outside of those clusters.
Jesse, I mean, sorry, Ben.
It's kind of like a mullet. We got universal Ethereum-wide interop execution in the front, chain-specific settlement in the back.
Yeah, and I did like a Venn, it's not quite a Venn diagram, it's almost like a concentric circle. Like you can think about your chain, then you can think about your cluster, and you use cluster interop there, and then you can think about the entire Ethereum, and you use 7755 interop there, and then maybe we expand 7755 interop to all the L1s, including Solana, and we're actually working on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, my talk right after this, I go much deeper in these exact same concepts. So I love you articulating that. I did not include a mullet on my talk, but I'll have to fix that. Next.
Got to grow that hair fast.
Hey.
I'm actually about to buzz my head and go fully bald once base crosses 10 billion TVL, so maybe I can give you some of my hair.
Let's go. Let's go. All right, Vitalik, because you've been quietly listening to these guys talk about their ecosystem-specific interop techniques, which I think are super cool. And there's others, like we don't have everybody on stage that we'd like. ZK Sync has their elastic chain. Polygon has their egg layer. All of these other very cool techniques to make interoperability within a set of chains better. And I mean, Jesse kind of feels like the moderating force trying to like connect some of these islands here too. But there is this real risk that the incentives to solve interoperability are within ecosystems, creating these highly connected islands that are really great interop between them. And then just kind of like, it's a little bit harder to go between them. So yeah, we've touched on some of this already, but to really hammer it home, like how much does this worry you? And how do we solve it?
Yeah, and so I think my short-term ideal would be that even if things work using different underlying protocols within a cluster and between clusters, we at least use the same interfaces, right? So you would have some high-level interface standard, which is what the applications would use, and then if you have something happening within one cluster, it might use direct interop, and then if it happens between clusters, it might use some intent-based solution. And of course, like if you're moving an NFT over, then like it would, like you can't use intents for that. It would have to be direct, even if it takes 7 days. And then if you're using USDC, then like you could just use the USDC bridge directly. So it's like you get the best experience that you get given the technology that's available, but you still follow the same standards. So that's short term. Long term, I think, as we see like which of these solutions work well within an L2, I think eventually it makes sense to just adopt them across layer 1. And I don't think that this would require protocol changes. I think an ERC would be sufficient to do it, right? But like fundamentally, I think there just is obvious economic value in like having L1 level interoperability in a lot of areas, right? Like one simple example is like proof aggregation, right? Like it's like anytime any proof aggregation happens at all, you save gas because you know, instead of paying 500,000 times N gas, or if you're Starkware 3 million times N gas, you get to pay you know, 500,000 gas once, right? And but and so I think you know, short-term future is like that happening sort of software cluster by software cluster, but then long-term future there's even more value in just everyone across Ethereum land aggregating it, like at least once per proof system, right? And then you just, or maybe we just use like one proof system, and then if we use one proof system, we should use the one that everyone is comfortable with and just use Starks, right? And that way you're just, like you are paying like maybe 3 million gas and you're paying it in every single slot, but it's only ever being paid once, right? And that's like an obvious economic gain to every single participant. And then at the same time, it becomes easy to build on top, you know, some of these like native shared bridge ideas, potentially, some of like some shared sequencing based stuff, and like I think all of those things are in the participants' interest. It's just that we need like a couple more years for the tech to, and ideas to keep maturing and solidifying.
So if I'm going to summarize, it's like common interface on the, it's the mullet analogy. I'm going to start using this all the time. We're going to define a common interface up front, and then we're just going to have a bunch of innovation on the back end. And as that we figure out what works best on the back end, we can enshrine, maybe not via an actual protocol chains, but can push that forward in the protocol. Any of you guys disagree with that, or should I keep pushing?
I mean, I think what I would say is that there's a whole other side to fragmentation of Ethereum that is actually unrelated to these kind of capital efficiency problems, and it is the like security model problem. And I do want to call that out, that even if we get really fast bridging between a bunch of different ecosystems and that's doing well, we still are introducing inherent risk when it comes to the governance of these systems, and like the Bridge Hack 2.0 governance edition era could be the next meme of the bull run that I'm really worried about. So yeah, I think one thing that we really need to do is work towards stage 1 and stage 2 decentralization. Like none of these L2 ecosystems have more than one stage 1 chain right now. Shout out Base, real fucking close. Oh, pardon my language. Just deployed permissionless fault proofs. Yeah, there we go. But we have a responsibility as an industry to keep pushing forward, not like the weakest links that we see. And I think there's a real risk that we keep doing this mullet and it goes really, really well, but then it turns out the part of the hair in the back actually gets broken in other ways. So I don't know, that's my...
Yeah, I think that's super fair, and like Vitalik has been pushing hard on this too. And like, give shout outs to Arbitrum here too. They've been pushing real hard on their TC. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Right? Like, you guys are a group of people on stage that actually legitimately care about like the decentralization stuff. It's not just a meme. So like, kudos, right? Okay, so I agree with that. We also have like a wallet problem. So and they're kind of correlated, right? Like, we want this wallet to, we want to get wallets to adopt a bunch of innovation around chain abstraction. Wallets are notoriously a little bit slow to innovate here, and for good reason, because frankly, security, right? You don't want to mess with user funds. I'll just throw one question out there. You guys have any brilliant ideas on how we're going to get the wallets to innovate on this chain abstraction world here?
We're just going to do it. I mean, I don't know if everyone in the audience knows, but, and I see some faces from the wallet team here. I started working more closely with the Coinbase wallet team in the last month and a half, and we've started making really fast progress on exactly this issue. You know, I think our thesis is that we want to be building a wallet that's built open source, that's built on open standards like 7683 and 7755, and that facilitates open markets. Because if we can build a wallet that embraces those things, we actually have a chance of making it so that the UI layer of Ethereum embodies the same values as the chain layer of Ethereum. And so I think on top of that philosophy, what we're going to be able to do is we're actually going to be able to build a wallet that actually moves a lot faster. because it's going to be getting all of the acceleration from those open standards and everyone else building on it. And we're going to get all the acceleration from the open source and everyone else contributing to it. And so my gut tells me that we are reaching the point where we're actually going to see faster and faster acceleration in terms of wallet development.
You forgot the third item in the list, which is passing the walk-away test.
And passing the walk-away test, that too, where you can take all of your assets with you, or if you decide, hey, screw this thing, we want to go somewhere else, you totally can.
Well, no, the walk-away test is if you guys decide to go retire and shut down with a click of a button, then users are all safe.
Yes, 100%.
We really don't want Coinbase to go shut down and retire, though.
Well, I totally agree. But one thing I'm excited about is Base just passed the walkaway test. So just with fault proofs that we rolled out live in collaboration with Optimism, as of 3 weeks ago, if all of Coinbase shut down, users would be able to exit, continue doing their thing. So deeply committed to that. Walk away. And thanks for Vitalik for always keeping us honest. It really does matter. Like, I can tell you that, there's, I forget what event it was at, but maybe like 3 months ago, 4 months ago, we've been working towards stage 1, fault proofs, all these things to try and get it done. And then Vitalik was like, everyone needs to get to stage 1. And my whole Slack for the whole day was just people sending me that, being like, how do we get there faster? How do we get there faster? How do we get there faster? And so I think having leadership from the top in this ecosystem, setting that North Star and pounding the table for decentralization and pounding the table for this future that we're all building of an open global economy that anyone can participate in, it makes an impact. So thanks, Vitalik.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse.
Jesse, well said, right? And it's like Vitalik is a consensus builder. He literally builds consensus protocols, but he keeps the bar high. We like him keeping the bar high. With that in mind, we don't have that much time left, and I think we're going to take a couple questions. But just you guys are on stage with Vitalik. What would you want him to do to help unify Ethereum? Is there anything like any wish list items? We can kind of corner him on stage here and be like, hey, can you do this?
Yeah, I think Vitalik's done a fantastic job, despite what detractors say, clearly executing a roadmap. And we've done, as an ecosystem, a really good job executing on that. So I think, which he's been doing, keep executing that roadmap, keep mentioning that roadmap, making sure people are aware of it, and keep rallying all of us around it and making sure we keep true to it. I would say, the other two things are keeping us all focused on, growing the pie rather than redividing the pie, I think is important. Ultimately, we're all here to build a better Ethereum ecosystem, and Vitalik's been a fantastic leader until now, and please stay with us and continue doing that.
All right.
We still got you guys got anything else to add? We're going to roll in a Q&A otherwise.
Don't let Twitter distract you too much.
Good, well said. Yeah. I'm not sure how we structure Q&A with an audience this big.
Yes, we're going to do Q&A, and would you like to moderate the Q&A? I can cross the question if it's already answered.
Sure, I'm happy to.
Oh. Good, please. All right.
Oh, I see how this works. Okay. Wow. This is cool. Okay, first question. What if the SEC were to target L2s for running an unlicensed exchange since L2... It's a kind of annoying question, guys. We're saying, given that they're under a multi-sig with the team controlling everything, I don't think that's true anymore. Let's talk about this. Like, yeah. Jesse, you're part of a public company. You run an L2. You're not worried.
Look, the regulatory environment. The regulatory environment in the United States has been massively unclear, and I think that that's created an environment where entrepreneurs at every level are worried about running afoul of laws that are incredibly unclear. And so I think that fear and uncertainty is grounded in a real thing. Now that said, when we launched Base a year and a half ago, we went to very, very, very great lengths to ensure that the way that Base was set up, even before it had fault proofs, was such that there was no single team or single entity that had outsized control, such that it would be into kind of like the classic money transmitter license domain. That was like a thing we wrote, literally a 50-page, internally they call it the base Magna Carta of like, why is this thing treated more like an open internet rather than a money services business? And since then, we've only decentralized further. We have fault proofs, we have a more decentralized security council, we have checks and balances. And so I think that the question isn't quite spot on, and the progress we're making is putting us clearly on the side of this is free internet that's open to everyone.
Yeah, well said. I mean, you got anything to add, or should we?
I think like the test that you want to have is like the gun-to-head test. Someone comes and says, hey, Steven, shut down Arbitrum, or Jesse, shut down Base. Like, what is your response? And in my case, our response is Arbitrum has had live fraud proofs in production since day one. Arbitrum DAO controls completely the future technical and financial of the chain. And the Arbitrum Security Council, by the way, can be turned off by the DAO at any point and is elected with elections every 6 months, and you need 9 out of 12 to do. So not myself, not Off-Chain Labs, not the Arbitrum Foundation, we don't control this chain, and I think that is a really important test, and that's what decentralization means.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very good point in there. You guys are high profile, right? If somebody wants to shut you down, they know where to come and be like, hey, do it. And there's some evidence in that hasn't happened. All right. Whoa. Screen went very white. Okay, Vitalik, one question. Vitalik's seemingly optimistic about interoperability being solved faster than expected. So my goal is that like it took us 4 years to solve scalability. I would like interop to be less than 4 years.
Yeah, remember Justin Drake's 2029 timeline, that's like the timeline for Nirvana. That's like the perfect chain that's like platonically beautiful and solves every problem. We can like do all the practical user stuff, I think, within 2026. So why am I optimistic about this? I think the big thing that a lot of people are sleeping on is like just how much social capital is being built up in the ecosystem. Like the rate at which the Ethereum L1 is able to implement and execute and spec out on EIPs is accelerating, right? And it's like very visibly accelerating. The complexity of the EIP is being done as accelerating. And I think the reason why is because you just have this entire community that's like getting better and better in this loop of coordinating with each other, speccing, planning, implementing, and agreeing on and pushing out each set of proposals. And every time that happens, the whole ecosystem learns together. And I expect that the exact same thing is going to happen to the layer 2 ecosystem and the wallet ecosystem, probably on an even faster schedule.
Strong +1 to that. I mean, just as an illustration of that, 2.5 years ago when we started working on Base, there were probably like less than 10, 15 people who were building things on chain at Coinbase. It's a 5,000 person company. Today, we're in the hundreds. I expect that within the next year, we'll be in the thousands. And so there's this massive effort happening across so many companies in the entire industry who are saying now's the time to build, because the technology is finally ready, and the more of us that we have coordinating to build this future and the infrastructure required to take us there, the faster and faster we're actually going to be able to move.
Yeah, I got to add my own take on this from like a social capital perspective, and like, so ERC 7683, which I'm talking about right after this, we very quickly, so Across is a co-author with Uniswap, we very quickly got like 35 teams on board supporting this, including Optimism, Arbitrum, Base, ZK Sync, Polygon. We'll talk about this all next, but we got all the L2 ecosystems on board and all these other protocols because there is social capital to solve this interoperability problem. So I'm bullish too. Okay. Another good question. It could be annoying talking about Solana, but I think it's a good question. Do you see Solana as a competitor now?
Well, we've all answered questions. You've answered 0 questions so far.
This is for you, huh?
Okay, I'll answer this. Solana, look, I'm not a Solana hater at all. I think Solana, I have a view that Solana does Ethereum a service of showing the other way, right? And we should actually honestly like learn from that and respect it and compete. Competition is a beautiful thing. And my take here is that after Devcon with blobs and 4844, any individual L2 is a Solana-like experience. It is fast and cheap as Solana, and it's beautiful. Yeah, cool. Applause that, right? And that's these guys. That's these guys doing this. You guys, like Jesse, you got a Solana, and Steven, you got a Solana, and Ben, you got a Solana, right? The problem is there's too many of them now, right? So like we just got to unify them. And so is it a competitor? Sure, but I think Ethereum has way more scale just by the nature of the rollup-centric roadmap.
I just want to echo the competition point. I think it works against Solana. Like, I'm super happy that Solana exists because I think it really pushes us to the core to say, you know, how do we get the good features of Solana without compromising the important features we have? And that's always important. Competition is important. I'm super happy that Optimism exists because Arbitrum wouldn't be as awesome as it was today if nothing was pushing us to be competitive, and I'm sure that's a two-way street as well. So I love competition within the ecosystem, and I think we're, as Ethereum, lucky to have competitors, but we're still better than our competitors.
Hear to that. Let's cheers them, guys. Like good competitors here, right? Driving innovation. We like that. Okay, so question here talking about this, framing the superchain as a federation, which Ben, I'm curious if you agree with that or not, and asking if there's some risk of making Ethereum less decentralized by the federations like the superchain emerging.
The answer, quite frankly, is, I think in many ways, yes. If I'm holding us accountable as a community, the answer is yes. And I actually would take it a step further. If you look at the history of the internet, so much of the vision of what crypto is going to bring to the table was the vision for the internet, and capital and capitalism got in the way and turned it and re-centralized the living heck out of it. So I think that, quite frankly, that risk is there. Quite frankly, that risk exists at every layer of the stack. The reality is if 99% of people interacting with Ethereum today do so through one centralized gateway of their RPC provider of choice, that is a Web 2 business, it is a Web 2 control structure, and it is what exists. The same is true at the application layer. The reality is that we need to solve these problems if we are not going to repeat the mistakes that the internet made. So that's why Optimism has funded 8 figures of public goods to keep Ethereum open source, because it's not happening naturally. There are closed source elements that are coming into our ecosystem, and we must reject those. So yeah, you should absolutely look at the superchain as a cabal risk. Do I think it is the biggest cabal risk that Ethereum faces right now? Absolutely not. I think that exists at every layer of the stack.
Yeah. I think one other thing I want to say about competition is that I think we should not just be thinking about competition within the blockchain world. I think like SEPA is competition. The credit card system is competition. That like new BRICS Pay thing that got announced like 1 or 2 weeks ago is competition, right? The centralized world is moving forward, and like blockchain is cheaper than Bitcoin arguments that were very easy to make back in 2012 are definitely much harder to make today. And at the same time, like the rest of the world is moving forward today, right? The space of things we have to think about the decentralization and privacy of. Like 10 years ago it was websites, and now we're talking about AI, and in 20 years we're going to talk about reading our minds, right? And so the world is moving forward, and we absolutely have to move forward to keep up.
All right.
I was just going to give a strong +1 to that. Off-chain is competition. Yeah. On-chain, we're building together, and it's time to build a